Hello, everybody. This is Justin. We're going to get started here about 2 minutes after the hour just to allow some additional time for folks to join us. And I'm sure some will trickle in after that, but we'll get started in about 2 minutes.
Hi, Justin.
Hello. We're going to get started at about 1:02. Okay, well, I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today is our state's first ever legislative conference for Minnesota SHRM. My name is Justin Turch. I am the Legislative Affairs Director on the board of MinSHRM. And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Carrie Patton, our state director, and Jay Kruger, our state director-elect, and all of us on the board and staff of Minnesota SHRM. As you know, all of our activities are run by volunteers. All of our board members are volunteers. And so we're excited to be able to bring this event to you throughout the state to chat a little bit about some of the things that are happening in our state from the legislative perspective. This year, we're doing it virtually as a test run. And hopefully next year, we're able to actually do it at the Capitol building and be able to be there and meet with our representatives and hear from them in person. So today is a great opportunity for us to test the water, and hopefully everything goes smoothly. And if it doesn't, we'll make the best we can. Everybody gets 2.5 credits for their certification, and that will be distributed to you by Christine Strack, I believe. We'll coordinate that with our volunteer membership director, Tracy Overson. We have 3 speakers today. We have Jason Gabhart, who's our professional lobbyist who specializes in state affairs, who's going to be coming up towards the end of our time together. We have Senator Eric Pratt, who is the chair of the Senate Jobs Committee, who will be talking to us about his committee's work and kind of the nuts and bolts of getting laws passed and you know, how the cheese and sausage is made, as they say. But to begin our day today, we're actually going to be welcoming a special guest, Commissioner Jim Showalter. Commissioner Showalter, among many other tasks, is the Chief Human Resources Officer for the state's 50,000 employees. And so he shares that duty, I'm sure, with a whole bunch of other ones, including some fiscal responsibilities. And he's going to share a little bit about who he is and what he does, and as well as the governor's priorities for Minnesota and some of the legislative initiatives that they're focused on you know, in the administration. Commissioner Showalter has been the commissioner for both in Governor Walz's administration and I believe Governor Dayton's as well. And he's worked in the private sector, and so we're really excited to have him. He has a master's degree from Harvard and his undergraduate from Macalester College here in Minnesota. So without spending a whole lot of prep time, I'm going to roll it over to Commissioner Showalter and his staff. And again, Commissioner, thank you so much for being here. I know this is probably a very busy time for your office, and the fact you're here means a lot to us. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. And if we have any tech issues, we'll get them resolved.
Sounds great. Thank you, Justin. I appreciate the invitation and chance to be here, because I'm pretty sure you and everyone who's on this call also have plenty of other things on your to-do list. And so I just appreciate the chance to talk with you and get together, because that is an important next step for, I think, managing and moving forward. So by way of introduction, you're absolutely right. I'm a veteran of state government. I came in as an analyst many years ago, and have just enjoyed public service and taken on a number of roles, from a middle manager to the state budget director, under the Governor Plenty's administration, to being able to be commissioner under Governor Dayton's administration. And having the chance to come back in the Walz-Flanagan administration has been just special, particularly because there's so many challenges, and so it's just such an interesting time. I obviously don't do this alone. MMB is the central organization for the state, both as our human resources talent kind of organization, to our budget and finance kind of organization, and also kind of that connecting tissue of management strategy and doing things better. And it's a fascinating place, and I can't imagine a better place to be at this point in time. With me today is Stephanie McGuire. She'll be driving the slides, and she's an example of that kind of renewing energy at the state and at MMB in particular, coming to us just for a little while ago, and that's really an important part. Before I go any further, though, I just want to pause and recognize everyone who's on the call. As human resources professionals, this has been quite a remarkable time. And the point that I have is that you may not be entirely excited to hear my address, because the fact of the matter is that there has been a lot of things that have been going on for you. The uncertainty that I walked into when I took this position about 18 months ago has been shared by each and every one of you. And it's sort of central to the things that you do on a daily basis, of addressing COVID concerns, of responding to social unrest and how that plays out inside the workplace, and dealing with a constant state of transition of what is the emergency and the firefight that you're trying to deal with every single day. I know on behalf of MMB, we deal with that within our organization on behalf of state employees, and I am pretty confident that each and every one of you have dealt with a lot of those same issues. They come through the HR stream pretty directly, through the testing and vaccination policies of your organization, through mental health services and wellness programs for your employees, through the provision and ability to get PPE or have a safe workplace that everyone feels comfortable in, or managing telework and how to manage performance in a new environment. All of these things are front and center on HR's plate. I know it because we deal with it. And I just want to call it out, because before we talk about what's ahead and what's in the legislative session, I think it's really important for each of you to just take a deep breath and accept my thanks and accept the thanks of everyone who has been working with you, because it may not be the easiest thing to be thinking about what's next. It's important to be gentle about sort of acknowledging and pausing to reflect on where you've been, and before you start sort of dashing into new challenges. So just thank you, and I appreciate the chance to be with you here today. We'll talk a little bit about the labor market and in a couple of different phases. On the next slide, what you've got is three sort of the key points. So the takeaways are going to be just a couple of descriptions of some of the governor's workforce strategies. I appreciate that Senator Pratt will be coming in soon. He's really a critical element of the legislative debate and a leader in this sphere. So it's really great that you're going to be able to talk with him. Some of the governor's workforce strategies we'll walk through in short order, but I think you'll understand sort of the comprehensive nature of the administration's approach. Two, I want to set into your mind some of the economic trends that you're fighting against, you're dealing with, and you can see all the time, and it help you put your fingers on the pulse of some of those trends that are going on in the state and in the economy generally, because they're really important to recognize and assess what's going on. And then we'll just conclude with some of the opportunities and challenges ahead. So that's kind of the game plan that I've got here. The bottom line here is that we've got a lot of things to cover, and on a daily basis, you're looking at vacancies and wages continuing to rise and who's taking the jobs. And I'm just hoping by the time you get done with this presentation, you'll have a little bit better sense of how these things fit together and what you can do about it. So next slide. On the next slide, you see what the governor's workforce strategies writ large. There's 6 of them, and they're really not a single strategy. What you're going to see is that from the state's perspective, and I'm not the state as an employer, but the state as all of us together, we've got different issues depending on what sector you're looking at, what types of part of the job market you're looking at, and that no single workforce strategy is going to address them all. And so with the governor's supplemental budget recommendations, there's 6 different themes that are really important in trying to address some of those key issues. We came up with these strategies in a process that tried to include as many voices as possible. One of the core groups was a workforce group that came in from across the state, in many sectors, bringing their perspective to the table so that our commissioners at DEED and DHS in particular could listen to and gather that kind of intel and insight about what are the challenges that people are facing on a day-to-day basis as employers or employees. I also want to point out that when we're talking about public sector strategies, this administration's been taking pains to make sure that we talk about it in an interagency approach. That although we do have a Department of Employment and Economic Opportunity, there's like the DEED, economic development, that doesn't mean that all strategies are housed in that agency. And so we try to bring to bear information and ideas from different places. And that last piece is that these all should be data informed, that we're trying to make sure that we're aware of what's going on and how everyone really is affected by the workforce. The next slide just starts the 6 different themes in the governor's legislative agenda. Strengthening the pipeline by investing in students. The context is stated here, but it is, I think, pretty common knowledge that our future is dependent upon our youth and their ability to get educated, to get trained, to find careers that feed their passions and match their skills. And a leaky pipeline, to push that analogy a little bit too far, means that we're losing opportunity, both for the individual and not being able to realize their dreams, but also for our state economy, because we're losing and wasting talent and wasting opportunity. And so the crux of the governor and the lieutenant governor's recommendations are to strengthen the pipeline by investing in students. And there's a number of initiatives that are listed here. The core of it really is to continue focusing on education. That ultimately we need to support students at every step of the stage to make sure that there's not breaks between junior high and high school, that the high school curriculum really continues to enhance and move students forward, and to the extent that they're looking at different career paths, that we find ways to it. And so there's a raft of different suggestions, and if you look at the financial architecture of our recommendations, you'll see that the vast majority of our ongoing investments are in that education area, from childhood education to K-12 education and going into higher education. That is really a core strategy to make sure that our kids and the kids in our communities have an opportunity to make it into the workforce and really fully participate. But there's 5 other strategies in addition to that. The next slide shows, it just points out that activating overlooked workers and helping get them into great jobs is important. Stephanie, if you could just advance the slide 1. In this context, we all know that there are individuals who can and want to work, but they're not getting connected to good jobs. And so where are we underutilizing people and talent in our communities? And how can we, with small interventions, make sure that we can get them into better spaces? Some of the types of investments that are listed here, again, this is it's got to be a combined strategy, so that as an HR official, it is important to know about these things and to tap into them. But as a state public policy, we got to make sure that we're continuing to build bridges, build connections so that people are able to access and get into the kinds of jobs that really fit their opportunities and their potential. The next slide looks at a different strategy, which is to attract new talent and jobs to the state. Minnesota's got an aging workforce, and over time, we've always been at best kind of a modest intake of immigration from other states. At worst, a significant loser in immigration going to other states. The way to attract new talent to the state is numerous different strategies, and some of them are listed here. But it's also to recognize that it is, how do we have an economy and a community setting that really breaks through? And so, whether it is some of these communication or infrastructure things like the angel tax credit, or whether it's something like the paid family medical leave, where this is the type of place where you can come and take a chance, start a business, and find ways to still sustain yourself and continue to grow the economy. Got to note that I talked about in-migration, out-migration with other states. The other thing that I'll come on to talk about a little bit later is international immigration and how that affects Minnesota, because that has actually been a consistent net plus to Minnesota and is a really key factor to our economic future. The next slide gives you to focus on critical sectors. Even as we talk about these macro issues, there's just places that have been stressed over the last couple of years, healthcare and education being foremost among them, where they've been really hit by the pandemic, the different changes in working conditions, and looking at investments that help to shore up those sectors before another COVID wave, ultimately so that those sectors are able to be resilient and keep going. There's a number of different types of investment that are shown here. One that I just want to highlight is that investment in the CNA program, Certified Nurse Assistants. It's a tough job. It's a low-paying job, and it was one that was in dire shape in terms of getting new incumbents to come in and take those jobs during the pandemic. Almost on a dime, almost on a call, we had a conversation in the state to say, are there ways to help really move people through that process faster? We worked, our Office of Higher Education led the effort, talked with our partners at Minnesota State, and within weeks, we had a strategy and ultimately a program that over the last 6 months has moved a number of people through in rocket speed to get them into critical services. There are opportunities to do things like that. And whether it is to help people get into critical job sectors quicker and faster, whether it is to retain teachers with bonuses or create better pathways for educators, there are different things that we've proposed and put on the table that we're looking forward to the Senate and the House to look at as we try to find things that we can come agreement on and move forward. Looking into the future is the next slide. What you see here is just the obvious need for technology and manufacturing jobs. We have reskilling program ideas, tech workforce training ideas and programs that are important and in some ways swing above their weight, because we know that this has been and continues to be a growth industry in Minnesota. Hopefully our educational system is providing the kind of talent and skills necessary, but there's also opportunities to sort of take mid-career opportunities or moves. And so there are interventions that DEED and our agencies felt were possible to help continue to invest in technology and manufacturing jobs in Minnesota. We're already a hub, but we're not like that top tier hub. It's like, how do we keep on investing to make sure we have the talent? Because the talent will bring the hub here. Finally, is just to support the whole work. On the last slide, there's the very obvious point that's been driven through this pandemic, which is that workers need support. They need to get to the job if they need to travel to get there. They may need childcare because not everyone can actually handle their family and be online at the same time. Housing, if your housing unstable, or don't have conditions that are conducive to work or stable to make sure that you can bring yourself to work. It's like, these things are real. And we've seen that time after time, and I'm sure all of you have. And so there are a number of critical infrastructure, and by infrastructure, I mean supports for our workforce, that free up people to enter the workforce, to stay in the workforce, or to seek new opportunities that we're talking about. I want to just call out one of them is just on the childcare investments. We tend to pay markedly lower for childcare supports that are supported by public payments. One of those just very simple, very important things is, can we raise the reimbursement rate to the 75th percentile of market for childcare? Because if we do, what we're going to do is make sure that we're both supporting that childcare industry, which has been in a tough time. Because if your kids aren't showing up, people can't bring them in because of COVID, those childcare providers go out of work. How do we keep that industry going? And how do we make sure that there's an adequate supply of them long-term? Quality suppliers of childcare so that mothers and fathers can go to work, know that their kids are secure in good environment, and it really is conducive to the work and work needs that their parents may have. So these are some of the things that the governor and lieutenant governor put on the table in our biennial budget. We have at this point a significant opportunity with more than $9 billion in projected budget surplus for this current biennium. So it's about a year and a half left in this biennium. And this is a huge opportunity. We know we're not going to do all of these things, but we do insist on doing some of them, that we have to move forward now. Because just because we're uncertain about what happens with the economy or what happens with inflation isn't an excuse to not take steps forward right now, because we know Minnesotans have needs, they have opportunities, and that our economy needs to keep going with the kind of momentum that's really gotten us to a place where we had the opportunity to have a surplus. The next slide really starts to transition into that economic view and helps you understand how we got here and what are some of the things that you might be experiencing. Twice a year, myself and the state economist and the state budget director deliver an economic and revenue forecast and a budget forecast in November and February of every year. The last couple of them, last several of them have been real events because there have been so many changes and so many uncertainties that we've been trying to sort through and explain. I'm going to just pull out a couple of those threads for you so you can get some context about what's going on in Minnesota. Here is just looking at U.S. wage and salary income growth. This is, again, for the nation, not for Minnesota, but our trends tend to be followed pretty closely. And what you're going to see is basically that after the 2020, in 2020, wage and salary growth was really low. It was a little over 1%. This doesn't mean everyone's paycheck only went up by 1%, but it's like on average, all wages and salaries all together grew by 1%. That means a lot of people didn't receive wages, or that those who had jobs had more moderate increases. That grew significantly in 2021. Didn't mean that everyone on average got 8 or 9% more, But it did mean that more people were working, more people earned wages. And so overall, total wages that were paid out were 8 or 9, and now estimated to be 9.1% more than the previous year. And that has continued. And that kind of snapback really defined the economic and revenue story for the state and public sector entities generally, is that people made more money during the trough of the recession, the COVID-induced recession, as well as snapped back and got back to a place of growth much faster and much more strongly than originally anticipated. The next slide sort of shows you another factor about the public financing and what's really setting up that $9 billion surplus that I mentioned earlier. Corporate profits also were higher than expected. As we went into the recession, what happened was that there was quickly, a decrease in US corporate profits, but that they came back quite quickly. And in fact, that change in that churn exceeded all of our expectations about what could be realized. That was another source of revenues that really helped buoy Minnesota's revenues, as well as some local revenues, but mostly at the federal level and other states. And what you're seeing here is sort of a reshuffling as corporate profits have gone out. Now what's happening is that's starting to move downstream. It's starting to move into wages, starting to move into other costs, and it's showing up in some of the inflation that we're experiencing. So these are some of the kind of macro pieces that we're looking at. As these corporate profits have grown, then that really usually drives economic growth. It really drives people into invest and to pursue new opportunities. That drives jobs. The next slide shows you what happens. With state unemployment, in Minnesota, we tend to have a slightly tighter and more to capacity labor market than the US generally. The bluish line shows you the Minnesota trends, and that is the unemployment numbers for the state compared with the US numbers in that greenish line. Now, if you look over the last several decades, you'll see that we consistently outperform the nation, whether in growth periods of the economy or in those darker periods where there's recession. Obviously, the Great Recession just before 2010, you can see how quickly unemployment rates grew and how significant it was and how long it took to get back to the place that we were just prior to the recession. You put yourself in our shoes in 2020, as we started seeing, and we started getting into that gray zone, and you started seeing the unemployment rate shoot up like it did. I don't think any of us would have anticipated that the numbers would come back quite so fast. And that, in fact, we're pretty much at the same place that we were pre-recession here in Minnesota and in Minnesota, in and across the United States. While there's, as you note in the box, 106,000 fewer Minnesotans are in the labor market right now, the unemployment rate for those who are in the labor market, based upon the wage data that we collect and Indeed collects, shows us at a place where we are at 2.7% unemployment rate, and I expect it to even drop further in upcoming months. The next slide gives you a little bit more information about how what happens in general doesn't happen for everyone. We have talked throughout the COVID experience that the recession and the impacts of COVID weren't uniformly borne, that BIPOC communities particularly were struck with impacts on income and in jobs, in disease, and a lack of healthcare opportunities. And that also is true as you look at the unemployment by race. Here you see Black, Hispanic, American Indian, Asian, and white unemployment rates in Minnesota. And while for a brief moment, Black unemployment rates were actually lower than they were for white Minnesotans, that has not been the trend over time. Same is true for Hispanic communities as well. And so the bottom line here is that while we are making progress overall, depending on where you're at, what community you belong to, you're going to have different experiences. And so that continues to be a key issue for us going forward. The Next slide gives you another sort of piece and perspective of what's happening. Minnesota's employment is recovering. What you see is a steady growth in employment in Minnesota, in non-farm employment, with a little bit of a tapering off just prior to COVID. Now, I'm going to come back to that in a second. But COVID struck, lots of unemployment. We just saw that a second ago, and it starts to shoot up, but we're still not there. A couple of factors are really important, both prior to the recession and COVID in 2020, and are important now, and that is federal immigration policy. As I mentioned before, net migration is part of our labor force story. Some years people on net move out and go to other states. Some years people on net move in to Minnesota. In general, we're kind of a net importer, but not strongly. International immigration, though, we're pretty consistently in a net addition to our workforce. But federal policy started changing around 2018, 2019. And so the number of immigrants into the United States started to slow. And that particularly affected Minnesota. And so as you see some of the sort of dampening growth in Minnesota employment, part of that is because we just had fewer workers. Fewer workers were joining us in the economy in Minnesota, and that started slowing our employment growth. That has continued, and that really is one of that backstory of where we're at right now for a tight labor market and opportunities going forward. The next slide just puts the other piece on, which is just that we have a dynamic labor market. And what this slide shows you is just sort of number of quits across the United States in terms of how many people are leaving their job at any point in time. You see that sharp decline, so that people were staying put in the midst of the COVID experience, but soon thereafter came back, and the changes were back on trend to where they were previously, and in fact have accelerated. So, people are willing to voluntarily leave their jobs, which has really contributed to a dynamic labor market. What we're seeing is that right now we're at an all-time high over the last several months, and the quits rates as a percent of total employment was about 3% in both September and November of 2021. That's like the highest that the BLS has seen since they began tracking these numbers in 2000. In the second half of 2021, 65 million Americans left their jobs and 4.5 million quit there in November alone. So where are these highest? In February, the quit rates were highest in the accommodation and food service industry at 5.2%, and lowest for government at 0.9%. That's just part of the backdrop that you as an HR professional and talent professional are facing, because you're seeing fewer people coming into the labor market. You're seeing more churn of people moving through and taking different opportunities. And ultimately, how do you move through? One part of the answer is on the next slide, that labor force participation in Minnesota is really an important factor. Minnesotans and Minnesota over time has a higher labor participation rate than the US generally. That said, it's not like if you break it down into racial groups, you still don't see the same level of participation by race. And so there's opportunities, and as we keep on sort of working through, where can we find opportunities for new entrants into the labor market, new opportunities to give, to reposition in the labor market and other things, so that this is one of those places where I think there's opportunities to really continue looking at how this economy sorts out and where we're going next. Just a couple more slides before I wrap up. Next year, it just shows the other piece, that we all know that steady wage increases have been occurring for a number of years. And certainly that's part of the environment right now. We are not anticipating that slowing down anytime soon. The next slide shows you the inflation rate that people are experiencing. And so while people were getting steady wage increases the last few years, that did not necessarily always settle up with what they were experiencing in their home costs. So particularly in 2021 and 2022, we're seeing significantly higher CPI increases than previous years. And while we still expect that to settle down, because the increase in energy prices should start to come back, the increase in inputs due to supplier chain issues. We expect that to be settling out, and we're starting to see that already. But now we're starting to see some housing pressure. There's a number of different things that are going on, and it'll take a little while before these things all work their way through. Those are some of the challenges that we have ahead. And let's go on to the next slide. So the governor's recommendations really are 4 different things. I highlighted one slice of them, of moving Minnesota forward and investing in jobs and local projects. Some of those go into the expanding economic opportunity. Some of those also affect supporting children and families, and even some of them help in protecting Minnesotans' health and safety. Workforce and labor opportunities are, really foundational to the entire package that the governor has put forward. And, we look forward to working with the legislature in finding ways to move these ideas forward, because we've got an opportunity to keep the momentum and move forward. But, in order to do so, we're going to have to come to find some kind of commonality, find some ways to continue growing the economy, and really understand the forces that are at work behind us. So to wrap up, and then we'll take questions. The session in brief here is just where we're at. This is supposed to be a short session. Doesn't feel like it, but it's a short session with bonding and capital investment questions on the table, supplemental investments to add to or change the shape of our budget, and federal funds, some of those recovery dollars that came from the federal government. There's a number of key issues that are on the table, and the timeline is here. All of it should be wrapped up by May 23rd. So we're really in that place right now where the legislature comes forward with their ideas. How much money do they think should be used for taxes, for direct supports, for new program exports? And who gets it? What is the targeting? Is it a one-time? Is it an ongoing support? These are the things that are on the table. And certainly the governor and lieutenant governor put a robust package onto the table to assess how do we move forward. I really look forward to seeing how we work it through. So to conclude, I just want to point that as an employer, we know that these aren't done in a vacuum, that we also have to figure out hybrid work, that we have to figure out how to help people through the stages of the pandemic, and think about what an endemic workplace looks like, what employment safety looks like. There's a lot of questions that we're hearing, and I think they're kind of exciting, because we have a chance as individual employers to create workforces and work opportunities that include everyone, that are more flexible in their nature, at least in some areas, so that people have the opportunity to balance their work life and their home life more equitably, that we have a more fluid workforce that has the opportunity to take different challenges and find new experiences. And all of this is challenging as HR professionals. And I just want to thank you for all of the work that you've done previous to this point, and for the hard thinking that you're doing going forward, because these challenges really won't get settled today. I can tell you MMB is already advising state agencies and has been advising state agencies that it's going to be more than a year before we have any idea where this is going to settle out. That right now we have to work through the issues of just like getting back into the office, finding new habits, settling out as a community, how our education system interacts with our employment and the workforce. All of these things have to settle out, even as we're telling outsiders, here's what the employment opportunity looks like. Here's the deal. These are challenging times. And as we sort that out and work through it, I know I lean on my employment team significantly. I know other agency heads lean on their EER, HR, talent, training and development teams extensively, because that's where it's at. And this is a profession that's on the rise. It's really central to how we're going to be managing going forward. And the questions that I laid out in the economic slides and those macros, they're going to continue for a while. So with that, I'm going to just turn it over back and let's take some questions and work through other things.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Commissioner. A wonderful presentation. One technical question that came up is one of our participants asked about kind of how the numbers on unemployment are affected by people who have chosen to stay out of the workforce. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the difference between unemployment rates and labor force participation rates and how those affect each other to better understand some of the numbers you shared.
Absolutely, a great question. And our state economist and state demographer would be even better to answer them. But the short version is this. Unemployment rate is not a comprehensive view of everyone and changes in the workforce. It really is it's a snapshot of it. And so if someone decides to or needs to remain at home to take care of family, loved ones, that is not a change in the unemployment rate, because that, in fact, they've removed themselves from the workforce. If somebody starts up a business and decides to try something on their own, they are no longer a wage earner from the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics perspective. So they are no longer in the workforce. So the unemployment rate is a statistic. It's a useful statistic, but it's not the whole story. Workforce participation is really a more extensive conversation about that includes some of those factors. But it is a different statistic, and those two do not move in sync. And that's why looking at changes in and differences in experience, differences in what else is going on for families and individuals and their employment decisions is really important, because we're all making different decisions. And sometimes voluntarily, sometimes not. And economic statistics can sometimes sort of suggest, oh, we're all included in this, and that's rarely the case. Taking a look at a number of these factors is really where you get to good analysis.
Would it be fair to say, Commissioner, that the labor force participation rate at a very high level, obviously, is really a rate that examines the amount of people who are either working or who want to work and are trying to work, versus unemployment is the number of people who aren't working but who would like to work or are attempting to work? Is that a fair boiled down definition of those two, or did I miss
Close.
that?
It's
Okay.
close. It's not quite right, and I won't get into it, but I think among the things is discouraged workers are not included in the unemployment rate. And so there may be people who just fall out of the data,
Okay.
and which is a terrible thing to say, but they are not counted in that unemployment rate, which just hides, I think, people and their availability or willingness to work. Also, individuals who are doing their in the gig economy, maybe working on their own, they would not be included in that data either.
Fair enough. Thank you. One of the things that, and by the way, if anybody else has questions, I have another one here I'm going to get to. Feel free to type them into the chat. One of the things that you shared in your slides as it relates to unemployment and labor workforce, as it relates to kind of racial demographics, was that I noted was the Native American rate of labor force and unemployment, which I just took a quick note that it looked like about 13% of Native American folks are unemployed, and they represent only about 60% of their population in that workforce participation. That kind of ties into an original question I had about kind of where we're allocating resources from between the Metro and Greater Minnesota. And we have people from all over the state here. Can you talk a little bit about how the governor and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, how the state or how their administration kind of thinks about the Metro versus the greater portion of the state?
For sure. Going to the core of the administration, it's one Minnesota. And so, everyone needs to be included and everyone needs to be addressed. And that means that we're going to have a variety of solutions and meet people where they're at in their community. So a solution that works in Bemidji may not be the same one that works in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. So there's very much a conversation and a micro-targeting. So when I brought forward those strategies, part of it is because there's different segments, but part of it is just different geographies that we're trying to bring in. So one Minnesota is a serious take on it. That shows up both in the supplemental strategies, knowing that childcare or education, you need to really look at individual counties and make sure we're marrying up with the needs there. But also in the capital investment, I didn't really talk about that, but obviously we've got a lot of different needs, whether it's for upkeep or investment and we try to balance it. And we're really careful about trying to make sure we're balancing spending and opportunities across the state, whether in greater Minnesota, in the metro, and so that we're addressing what's the local need.
Okay, great. One of the questions we had was about a particular sector, which was helping folks. I'm guessing this is in the workforce development sector, but helping young people or people who are seeking work have an opportunity to develop their career in the construction trades. I'm sure that's a need. You just touched on infrastructure spending. Is there anything the state is doing or would like to do that would invest in helping people have very stable careers in the construction trades, and plumbers, and carpenters, and iron workers, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. And I have to say that right now that sector is doing pretty well. That construction and the trades are doing pretty well. But obviously, the governor starts with a robust capital investment plan. Part of it is just making sure we get the infrastructure right, so that we continue to have those construction and trades jobs going, and that serves as the launching point for other investment. So whether it's roads and bridges, and wastewater and drinking water facilities, if it's more just keeping our facilities up to date, those are the kinds of direct investments that we've got going that would employ trades. And then also just continue to work with our state colleges and universities. I think the Minnesota State experiment with the CNAs is just that kind of example of when we see a workforce need, how can we work very closely with our training programs at Minnesota State to make sure people get into those jobs as fast as possible.
Great. Another question we had is, our employment laws hinder students getting jobs early in construction? I'm not sure what the context is for that question. And it says, are these roadblocks being discussed? I'm not sure the context, so maybe we'll come back to that if the asker could provide a little bit more context. One other question to touch on something you brought up was the issue of paid leave. So I'm up in Duluth where I have my practice, and I know Duluth, Minneapolis, St. Paul, a couple other cities have passed earned sick and safe time ordinances. Can you talk a little bit about the priorities of the governor's office and the administration as it relates to where they see paid leave going and what they'd like to see the legislature consider?
Absolutely. The governor, lieutenant governor put it on the table and talked about it quite a bit the last couple of years. And it's pretty core. I'd be surprised if it happens in Minnesota this year, but I certainly think we could make progress on getting it going and take steps to putting it in this year. I know the federal government has been actively debating whether it is time to take this step as well. The core issue here, and the pandemic sort of laid it bare, is that we need to have people showing up to work when they're healthy and not when they're sick. In a pandemic, part of the transmission, part of the issue was that people had to keep on coming into the office because they didn't have any sick time. They didn't have any ability to take care of their kids or their loved ones when they were sick. And that made everyone else more vulnerable. Now, the pandemic wasn't caused by this, but it certainly was an impact, and it certainly was a stressor, both on our workplaces and particularly on our workers and those who really had to show up in person. And so the PFML is a great opportunity, and it's something that we really need to make happen. We could take steps very clearly in setting up the infrastructure and getting it going this year. And I think what would happen is we would then create kind of that infrastructure for our workforce so that that you've got a backstop, and that no matter what sector you're in, you've got some supports.
Now, this question, you may not be in the details on this, so I apologize if I'm asking something that you're not intimately involved in, but as I looked at the legislation, I want to say I recall it being a little bit more similar to the unemployment system, the concept of paying for it. If you know about that, could you just share a very brief kind of high level view of what the proposal is as it stands today?
Yeah, a very, very simple way of conceiving it is a employer, it's a term of employment, and that so the employer would pay a fixed rate into the pool that would then fund those benefits. The point would be that kind of like UI, we're making sure that all sectors offer this benefit. In the initial years or initial year, there'll be some startup necessary to start collecting funds, whether they're provided directly by taxpayers or whether they're provided by employers to build up the reserves necessary to make sure that we have the ability to pay out. But the bottom line is it's a kind of common assumption of employment, like UI and like disabilities, like that you can get at least that minimum amount of paid leave, regardless of who your employer is or how long you've been there.
Wonderful. I just have a couple more questions and then we'll let you go here. This one is the follow-up to the one that we weren't sure the context on. And the asker says, teenagers can't work on construction sites, I'm sure because of workplace safety rules and things like that. Underage teenagers, that is. And the asker is about how we can help them build some of those skills while they're in high school, maybe through summer programs and work programs, in order to allow them to transition directly into those fields. Do you have any context or information on that? I know it's kind of a dolly question, I'm thinking, but
they are. It is. I don't have a great sense of that. Certainly, when I talked about strengthening the pipeline by investing in students, some of the points in there are really looking at high school supports and having a more experiential training and learning for high school students. I probably would need to bring in a colleague from DLI or MDE to sort of get at that a little bit further. But you're right. There are safety concerns and things like that. But how do we help kids in high school get on the track so that they're acquiring those skills? I know when I worked in a restaurant, I couldn't use the slicer until my 18th birthday. Day after my 18th birthday, I started using the slicer. But how do we make sure we have those minimum standards and have people ready?
Wonderful. Talk to us a little bit about where we're at on the unemployment insurance fund question. I know there's been some debate between the political parties about how to deal with that. Do you have any insight into how where we're at in addressing that key concern as it relates to the surplus money?
Yeah, the last slide, and I didn't talk much to it, but there are a few top level questions that I think really will frame the opportunity going ahead. The governor proposed more than $2.7 billion of general fund resources going to basically repay and restock the UI fund. The Senate has taken a similar position. The House has taken a position of somewhat less. And the three parties really haven't come to an agreement on that, in part because there's related issues about frontline worker pay, and where the governor's proposed $1 billion, the House agrees with that and the Senate hasn't. And they've proposed something smaller. And then there's other issues. So this is part of where the negotiations, and Senator Pratt and others will be really significant about, can we find a way through? Because I think everyone agrees that we should at least take care of the deficit of the UI fund, which is $1.4 billion. Ideally, we would put enough in or change the strategy so that we can avoid taxing employers going forward, so that we can keep that economic momentum and not disincentivize employment and new jobs at any level or in any sector. So that's kind of the debate right now. Minnesota has had a strong performance and a strong UI program. It was part of what helped Minnesota's economy and its communities and individuals get through the pandemic. It worked exactly as it was supposed to. And now current law would refill that fund for the money that it's spent through assessing employers. We could take a shortcut and take some of the tax revenue and replenish that fund. How much we do is really the issue in front of us. I think everyone agrees we should do some. The governor suggests just taking care of it with our surplus. We'll see where we end up.
Wonderful. And the last question I have is, because I'm interested in it. What's it like being in charge of human resources and a bunch of other stuff for 50,000 employees? What's the kind of the biggest challenge you face every day? I'm curious to see if it's the same one we face.
Well, it's a great honor for starters. It'd be really remiss if I just didn't say, wow. It is more than any one individual can do, and it really, my ability to even hold the title rests on a lot of other people being really good at what they do. And thank goodness we have those people, and we continue to attract those people, and we continue to build teams that continue to get better. And so that's kind of the first thing, is like, my gosh, that's a lot of responsibility and a lot of people, and you just need a really good team. And that's
Wonderful.
a challenge for us. I think the second thing I would just sort of toss in there is that, you know, it's hard, but you have to have a hard head and a soft heart, as one of my teachers once said, because you need to think about how is this going to play out in a lot of different situations, and yet be empathetic at the individual level and at the group level, so that, you know, you're not just sort of shutting the door and saying this is the way we do it, because clearly we can do things better, and clearly in this shuffling of the economy and our workforce, we have opportunities to do things better and differently, and we really need to take advantage of that. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. It is totally a challenge of the lifetime, and I just appreciate what you and everyone on this call has been doing, because it's been a rough couple of years, and it's an exciting but challenging couple of years ahead. And I can tell you, all of our organizations just completely depend on that talent, that HR function, in the culture that we build, because that's the competition that's ahead.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much for being here, Commissioner. I know that you have a lot of things going on, and I would like to thank you and Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and your staff for, first of all, being available, and for being super pleasant to work with and getting this arranged. So thank you again for your time, and we look forward to hearing from you again sometime in the future.
Take care.
Thank you. So next up, we are going to be welcoming Senator Eric Pratt. Senator Pratt is the chairman of the Senate Jobs Committee. He's a Republican senator, I believe, from the Brainerd area. I'll let him get into some of the details about his career and his past. He's been a very important partner to SHRM in discussing issues of revising the Wage Theft Act to keep the protections for employees while reducing some of the administrative burden and challenges that we've all faced over the past couple of years as it relates to that. I don't want to go out on a ledge, but I think pretty much most of the things we deal with, legally speaking, at the state level come through Senator Pratt's committee. And so it's really exciting to have him here to chat with us and to share with us his thoughts about the Jobs Committee, about his work, how laws are made, and some of the initiatives that his caucus has for the state of Minnesota. I would also be remiss if I didn't point out that this is their week to go home and have a little bit of break, and he's agreed to be here today and take a time out from some, I'm sure, important family time to chat with us. So Senator Pratt, thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to you. If you do need to share your screen, you're welcome to do so, and take it away. And it looks like you're on mute, sir.
That's okay. My wife likes me better that way. Thanks, Justin, and everyone for inviting me to talk to you today. I am going to try to share my screen here. I've never done this before, so let's see how it works. All right, there we go.
We have a blank screen right now, sir, but it says it's sharing, but it's all black. So.
Oh, okay. I see my PowerPoint, but I'm not quite sure what to do here.
When you click the share button, it should bring up another screen that allows you to decide which one to actually choose to share there. But if you'd like, you can also email me over your PowerPoint and I could handle it for you if you'd like to do that.
I just went black here. Hold on.
Okay.
Is it any better for you?
Not right now. And it's okay, because we all agreed that this was our first time doing this on for this type of a conference on Zoom. So we all agreed to take a little extra time if we need to on tech issues. So If you need additional time, that's fine. Or if you just want to email it over to me, I can go ahead and put it up and you can tell me when to move ahead.
I'm sorry, Justin, you cut out on me.
I was just saying if you'd like to just email the slide deck over to me, I can also click through it for you as you're talking if you'd prefer that. Oh, she said, I have somebody who says it might be the connection. Senator, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now. You cut out on me. I think I'm.
Okay, looks like we're having a connection issue. What I'm going to do just for a few minutes until we figure this out is I'm gonna Senator Pratt, I'm gonna send you an email here in a minute because I think we're having some connection issues.
Yeah.
I'm going to invite Jenny LeCanthy just for a few minutes to talk a little bit while I work with Senator Pratt on figuring out the PowerPoint issue. Jenny LeCanthy is our new field services director from SHRM, and she wanted a chance just to introduce herself and spend a few minutes speaking. And then I'll chat with Senator Pratt offline and we'll get the PowerPoint thing figured out. Jenny, are you available?
I am happy to jump in. And as Justin mentioned, my name is Jenny LeCanthy, and I was just assigned to the state of Minnesota for support from the National SHRM organization. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and just wanted to congratulate Justin and the state council team for hosting their very first legislative conference. That's really incredible, and kudos to everybody that is participating today. Before I joined SHRM, I was an HR professional like all of you, and I know how important these events can be just to keep in the loop with all the things under the HR hat. So I'm just going to take a few minutes, and whenever Justin cuts me off, I'll be happy to just stop where I'm at. But wanted to talk just a little bit about SHRM for some of you that may not be familiar with our organization yet. So SHRM is actually the largest HR organization in the entire world. We've got over 300,000 members, and we have offices in Virginia, we have offices in California, in India, and overseas. And we have lots of remote workers outside of those offices, like myself. I'm actually coming to you from Manhattan, Kansas, which is a great place to be located when I've got so many states in the North Central region here. So, you know, what we do at SHRM is we help HR managers, we help business owners, we help HR accountables, which just basically means those folks that may not have HR in their title, but they have HR responsibilities as part of their positions. What we do is provide tools and resources to help those folks succeed and to help them serve their constituents, their organizations to the best of their ability. I loved some of the things that the commissioner was saying about our profession in HR and just the opportunity that we have to positively impact not only our organization, but the people that are in the organization, and actually kind of by default, their families, right? Because the better we support our employees and make their workplace a better place to be, that's going to have kind of a trickle-down effect to each and every person in their world. And that comes from compensation, that comes from benefits, that could come from training and development, all of those types of things. So at SHRM, really our purpose is to elevate our whole entire profession by empowering and improving and advancing HR practices and just building a world of work that works for all. And I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but truly I believe it 100%. And I know there's many, many of you that would agree with me. So I have a couple slides that just talk a little bit about the value of SHRM membership. And for those of you that have been SHRM members for years, you probably, have tested and explored all the various different parts of SHRM membership. And you might even have a favorite part that is the most useful tool for you in the position that you have. There's so many things that we cover with our membership that I couldn't possibly cover all of them in the time that we have. You'll see on the screen just a few of the different kind of categories of support that we provide. And what we've done here is just try to assign a numerical value for what that service might cost you if you got it outside of having your SHRM membership. So we've got webcasts that are all included in membership. You can post jobs, you can talk to advisors, you can see research, you can get legal advice and expert advice from folks. You can look at compliance information. I mean, the list just goes on, and you can see that the value, if you added all of that up, is over $13,000. But a SHRM membership is just $229 a year. And again, here are just a few examples of tools and samples, different legal and compliance resources, lots of templates that you can start with. I have a couple of slides about interactive tools that are kind of a newer addition to the benefit package that I think are really interesting. Kind of got ahead of myself here. So these are the 6 different interactive tools. Maybe one of these kind of sparks your interest a little bit. The ones that I wanted to spotlight were the multi-state law comparison tool. I picked just a few of your surrounding states and your state, and you can see here that you can kind of see side by side how the different laws compare from state to state. And really the tool is very easy to use. You can select as many states as you want, and you can select as many different regulations and laws as you want. And that way you can just very easily see, especially for those of you that are multi-state employers. I had a generalist position once where we were in 6 different states, and keeping track of all of that is just can be very challenging. So I think this is a super valuable tool that, you know, the time that you could save could pay for the SHRM membership itself, to be quite honest. Here's another one of the new ones, a salary benchmarking tool. In my most recent position, I was actually compensation manager for Kansas State University, and we had a little over 5,000 faculty and staff. And so one of the things that was super important in my role was comparing different salary surveys, all of which we had to purchase, right, in order to inform our salary structure and make sure that we were paying competitive wages for a whole host of positions at the university. And that was both expensive and time consuming. So what SHRM's salary benchmarking tool gives you the ability to do is basically you can select a kind of a group of jobs, or you can select a specific job. If you are familiar with the BLS and ONET, you might recognize what is on the screen here with compensation benefits and job analysis specialists as a specific career code. But you can see here that I have compared the US wages with Minnesota wages. Again, you could add other states, you could do any number of positions and just have it right here really, really quickly at your fingertips to see how you compare. So in this example, you can see that in general, Minnesota is paying pretty well compared to the rest of the United States for compensation benefits and job analysis specialists. So that's kind of cool. And then Ask an Advisor is just a completely separate service that we offer, and you actually get 15 of these requests every year. And I have to say this is probably one of the least utilized benefits and possibly one of the most valuable, right? Because you have the opportunity to actually visit with a seasoned HR professional that can, you can visit by the phone, you can visit with chat, email, whatever you need, whatever works best, and they can actually advise on whatever HR topic or solution that you're needing help with. So I always like to talk about this one because, again, I just don't think that there's enough knowledge about it, and it can be such a helpful and valuable tool, especially for those generalists out there. I hear you. How can we know everything all the time? It's very challenging. So having these kind of folks, these advisors in your pocket can be really helpful. Another one of the benefits is express requests. And I've just taken a couple screenshots from the website, couple different categories that I thought might be interesting for this particular audience. But these are probably 3 of 15 categories. And each one of these blue bits of text here is actually a link that you can click on. And if you click on the link, you're actually going to get an email with tons and tons of resources on this specific topic. So whether you're preparing a presentation, maybe you're wanting to visit with your senior management team and trying to move something forward, you've got a lot of data to back up your next steps.
Okay,
Justin,
we're
I see
gonna.
you're back.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we're going to get back to Jenny a little later. I do have a question that she asked, a couple questions already, and I'll make sure we get answers to that for those of you who asked. But I do want to make sure that we respect Senator Pratt's time. I think we have a little bit of an internet connection issue. So Senator Pratt, if we have some audio problems, one little trick I've learned is if you turn your camera off, then more of your bandwidth goes to the audio. But I'm going to go ahead and share your PowerPoint here. And whenever you're ready for me to flip a slide, you just go ahead and let me know and we'll take care of that. The joys of remote work these days. So you can go ahead and kick it off, Senator.
Well, thanks a lot. And I don't know what happened. It seemed like things went kittywampus when I put it on slideshow. So, but everyone, my name is Eric Pratt. I represent Senate District 55, which is Scott County. So I have the communities of Shakopee, Prior Lake, Jordan, and for a short time, Credit River, the Minnesota's newest city, along with 5 townships. So we're just right down in the Southwest Metro. I grew up in the area, and it's been a real honor to represent my hometown. Why don't we just go ahead to the next slide? And so I chair as Justin said, I chair the Senate Jobs and Economic Growth Committee. And you know, a lot of times I ask myself, why do we have a committee that focuses on jobs and economic growth? And what we've decided is we want every Minnesotan to have an opportunity to participate in the economy. And so what that means for us is that we make Minnesota a great place to invest. Business owners don't just invest their money, they invest their sweat and their tears along with it. And so we want to make this a great place to invest in. We want to remove barriers to employment. So we've do a lot in skills training, supporting some job skills training, along with other barriers like childcare that might get in the way. We want to get people ready not only for the jobs of today, but for the jobs of tomorrow. So we just recently had some high school kids come in demonstrating some of the work that they're doing in robotics. And you know, so often we have people that are pro-business or pro-labor, but quite honestly, we just want to balance that relationship, balance the needs and the responsibilities of the employers and the employees to make sure that, you know, one doesn't have an advantage over the other. So just to give you an overview of the current session, this is a non-budget year. We passed our biennial budget last year, which funds all of the agencies in 2022 and 2023, and then we'll come back next year and start the budget process again. So this is what we typically call a redistricting year, or I'm sorry, a bonding year, which means that the number one bill that we're going to be working on is a bonding bill, which will be investing in predominantly public capital improvements. One example I have in my district is we're trying to put a new interchange on US 169 and Minnesota Highway 282. I had a slip to say this is a redistricting year, and it was a redistricting year. All of our legislative districts have changed. The Senate works, we have 2 4-year terms, and then in the year that ends in a 0, we run for a 2-year term, and now the entire legislature is up for re-election this year. What we wanted to do is, after the census, make sure that every Senate district was roughly the same. So for example, in my district, because Scott County is a growing area, geographically my district shrank a little bit. We've been working on unemployment insurance and trying to pay off the debt that we have to the feds and replenish the program so that we're not adding new taxes, new payroll taxes, new higher premiums to employers. We just recently passed a reinsurance extension for the private market. or I'm sorry, the individual market. That's the word I was thinking of. So that we can help keep some of the healthcare costs down. And then again, as I mentioned, because it's a redistricting year, this is an election year, and you're going to see election year politics at the Capitol from now until the end of session. Let's go to the next slide. So the Senate Republicans majority have rolled out, 3 areas of focus. We want to focus on the economy. We know Minnesotans are struggling with the increased cost of living, with supply chain backlogs, and even today I was listening to CNBC. There's some concern that inflation may be pushing us to another recession. But what we want to do is focus on small businesses and families. So we just passed through the Senate a record tax cut, eliminating Social Security tax, but also cutting the lowest tax bracket for every Minnesotan, which means that every Minnesotan who's paying income taxes is getting a tax break. And then all the committees are really looking to block permanent spending that comes as a result of a $9 billion surplus. We believe that the surplus is coming because we over-collected on taxes, not so much that we've underspent, although we are doing some targeted spending in some areas. We're focusing on public safety. We think that's going to be a huge issue, and I can tell you down in my neck of the woods, people are afraid to go to downtown Minneapolis, or we're afraid that some of that violence will be moving down here. We want to tighten restrictions on criminals and make sure that they're being held accountable for their crimes. And then education. We want to I served 12 years on the school board before getting on to the Senate. And we really want to focus on the needs of the students and making sure that parents have a say in their kids' education. Next. So the Jobs Committee is really focusing on a number of issues, but I wanted to highlight 3. And one I talked about just briefly is the Unemployment Trust Fund. When Governor Walz, Governor Dayton, wow, that was a mistake. When Governor Walz asked businesses to shut down, we saw record numbers of unemployment. And quite honestly, I imagine you and your members saw the same thing. 1 in 5 Minnesotans applied for unemployment benefits, and we ended up taking a $1.7 billion reserve down to about a $1.5 billion deficit. So we owe a debt to the federal government. We believe that we made a promise to everyone when we asked them to shut down was that we would hold them harmless. So Senate Republicans have passed on a bipartisan basis, I mean, quite honestly, a strong bipartisan vote, to pay back the debt to the federal government and to replenish the fund, not all the way to 1.7, but to a level where we can click off all the additional assessments that would raise payroll taxes. It just doesn't make sense to me that we would make it more expensive to hire people and help suppress those wages when we're trying to attract people back into the workforce. We're still 120,000 people short in the workforce from where we started pre-pandemic. Where I've had the pleasure of working with SHRM most closely is making some common sense changes to our wage theft law. But quite honestly, I don't want to give up any of the protections that we've given employees. So just a couple of quick highlights. We want some flexibility in the wage theft notice. Right now, the wage theft notice has to be filled out before and signed before someone starts, even though they have a lot of other paperwork to do once they begin their employment. So we're looking for some flexibility that if you're having a hard time getting that document back before they start, that you can get it back with a little bit of cushion. We want to be able to use some other legitimate documents to convey the information that's typically on that wage theft form. It might be in a handbook. It might be in a collective bargaining agreement. It could be in a number of other documents. We want to give you the flexibility to provide that information in the way that's easiest for you without having to duplicate it. We want to accommodate some of the temporary staffing agencies that are having a hard time saying, here's your wage, because we don't know what a person gets paid might depend on the assignment they get. And we want to limit penalties. If there's a, if there's a wage theft claim, businesses have up to 10 days after there's been a demand for wages to pay those, or start assessing a daily fine, which equals the wages that that person would have been paid. We think we want to make sure that there's pressure and incentive for businesses to pay those wages, but we also don't want to give the employees an incentive not to settle, right? We want them to try to find that balance. So I've been trying to work with advocates to see if we can find that middle ground. Also, if you have a mistake on your wage theft notification and you've made it multiple times, we want to be able to hold you harmless for that and give you grace for one. And then, we want to address workforce shortages. It's not just the jobs committee, but a lot of the committees are working on various aspects of increasing the number of people we have in the labor pool. The health committee has been working on nurse compacts. Senator Abler and his health and human services reform committee has been working with nursing homes. So we want to make sure that we have the ability to pull in new employees to fill the open jobs that we have without necessarily burdensome licensure. I think that's my last slide, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Senator. One question we have is, can you talk, I believe, but I might be wrong, that when wage theft was first passed, that you were involved in as the chairman, kind of dealing with the reasons. Can you talk a little bit how the form, as your committee was looking at this law initially, how the form tied into protecting employees from having their wages stolen? I know you and I have met with the commissioner of the Department of Labor to talk about this in some detail, but could you talk a little bit about the process, that the discussion that occurred that was leading up to that vote?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So one of the concerns is that many bad employers won't clearly convey what somebody's going to be making, and they're surprised once they get that initial paycheck and there are deductions, or it's lower than they expected. Because it's say a verbal offer. I worked 30 years in banking and financial services. And so when I started a new job, I would get an offer letter. And so the idea behind the wage theft notice was to be that offer letter. I didn't want to put any additional burdens on employers, but I did want to make sure that there was some documentation for the employees. So if there was a dispute, they could go back to that offer letter and say, here's what we agreed to before I started. What we're finding is that, and we asked the department to come up with a template, because they also wanted it in multiple languages. And we said, no, we don't want employers having to deal with multiple languages. So come up with a template that would hold employers harmless if they chose to use it. And so that's where the wage theft form came from. But quite honestly, your normal offer letter should have been sufficient. The former commissioner of labor and I disagreed on what the intent of these were, and she implemented the wage theft laws outside and further than what the law says she should. We've since scaled some of that back, but I want to be able to put that into statute so that we never have an activist commissioner go above and beyond what the law states. But I mean, the long and the short of it is, good employers have been giving offer letters or notices of what people should be paid, and that was the intent, that was the idea behind the wage theft notice.
Okay. have another question here on a slightly different topic. What's the reason for wrapping hero pay into the bill for the unemployment trust fund replenishment? That's part one, so I'll let you address that.
I don't know.
And that's a proposal of the administration, correct?
Well, so the administration proposed two things. They proposed hero pay and they proposed paying off the unemployment debt. And as the jobs chair, we took the governor's proposal on unemployment and we passed it. I mean, basically, we and the governor are in agreement. It was the House that linked the hero pay to it. Last session, we agreed to $250 million in hero pay. And we couldn't come to an agreement on what that should be. The Senate Republicans felt like we wanted to make a significant payment to the men and women who were on the front lines of COVID. And so we proposed a $1,200 payment to nurses, doctors, firefighters, those types of people. The House decided that they couldn't live within the 250 million, and we never got to a special session to pass that. We've been negotiating, fighting over, debating hero pay the entire session, but it was the House of Representatives that linked them together. And I believe it was the wrong thing to do. Minnesotans want us to take up these proposals individually and pass them. They're tired of this political gamesmanship where we're using the unemployment system, which is there to protect laid off Minnesotans from going into poverty while they're looking for a new job. And I just think it's wrong.
Okay, thank you. The other part of the question was, and this is more of, maybe you could provide some context. I think you mentioned that the Senate, and for context, the Senate is controlled by the Republicans and the House is controlled by the Democrats. Is that a fair statement?
That is. So we have
And I believe
legislature in the country.
you're the only one. That's correct. So tell me a little bit about, I think you mentioned that you wanted to replenish the fund, you being the Republicans in the Senate, but it wasn't to the full amount. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, again, it depends on what you decide is the full amount. So in statute, 1.3 billion would be fully reserved. That would get us to what we, or sufficiently reserved to where statutorily all the additional assessments would click off. Even though we did start at 1.7 billion in reserve prior to the recession. So we're coming short of where we started from. And with a $1.3 billion reserve, we can cover the payments that we have and continue to replenish that fund without any additional assessments on business, which is how we got to the 1.7 to begin with.
Fair enough. Regarding permanent tax cuts, what is your response to people who say that a one-time, I'm sure you're going to love this term, Walls check, is the more reasonable option than a long-term tax cut? And the person says that they believe the argument against the long-term tax cut was related to the belief that the surplus was largely from one-time pandemic money. So maybe you could provide some of your thoughts and beliefs on that topic.
Yeah, and that's a great question. There is part of the surplus that's one time. There's part of the surplus that's been recurring. I've been in the legislature 10 years, and this is the 8th surplus we've had. And we cut taxes back in 2019. We did a small tax cut, and we still continued to grow. We do have a structural surplus going forward. And so using part of this money, not to just give people a check one time, and we saw from many of the stimulus checks, they really didn't go into the economy. They went into people's savings accounts. And so we're not going to see the economic stimulus. What we're going to see from a permanent tax cut, the average Minnesota taxpayer, the average family will see $1,000 reduction in the amount of taxes that they pay. And we think that's good for stimulating the economy because it helps every single working family in the state, along with doing away with the Social Security tax. We're only one of 13 states that taxes Social Security. But just for a point of context, we're cutting the bottom rate. And everybody, your income goes through multiple rates. So if you're a high income earner, the first portion of your wages go through the lowest tax bracket, then they go up through the next, and the next. Our lowest tax bracket is higher than the highest tax bracket in 23 other states. We are charging low income families more than 23 other states charge their highest earning families. We think that's wrong. So we don't want to just give a one-time check, but we want to give permanent tax relief to families that are really struggling to deal with the inflationary pressures that we're seeing. You guys will know that wages aren't keeping up with the consumer price index, and that's having a real impact on the ability for families to pay, buy gas, buy groceries, and we're already seeing pressure on the housing market.
Great. You talked very briefly in your presentation about the issue of concerns about crime, particularly in the Twin Cities area. But I think, I'm up in Duluth. It's true here too. Can you talk about anything that's been discussed in the committee that might, how the crime situation might impact economic development and employment opportunities, particularly in the communities that are most affected by it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in the area, there's a strong correlation between crime and poverty, as you well know. And the areas where we need to see economic development happen is the very areas where we're seeing the highest crime and barriers to that investment. So we believe by holding criminals accountable, by putting additional police officers and encouraging police officers to stay on the job. We've had record numbers of retirements and resignations. We want to keep those police officers on the job, so we're offering them some bonus pay, some retention pay to stay in there. Holding county attorneys accountable for prosecuting these crimes, and then I think then we can start to talk about economic development. One of the things that we put into the last jobs bill was what we called Main Street revitalization, and $80 million in grants and loans to go to areas for economic development. So whether it's those that were impacted by the riots, those in greater Minnesota where you're trying to get and spur economic development, it's statewide, and we want to see that take hold, but we need to make it a good place to invest.
Great. One question I have is just, we talked about wage theft quite a bit. Can you talk a little bit about the status of some of the proposals that you have been working on along with SHRM, and kind of where it stands, and frankly, whether there's any hope?
Justin, were you thinking of any in particular?
Well, I don't want to say the extension, but the flexibility and the timeline for the form completion would be one.
Yeah.
And then the other one, as it relates to some of the caps on the fines. I mean, I think one thing that most folks in the HR community aren't, they don't necessarily concern themselves with, because most of our members are good employers who already follow the rules, even if it's painstaking, is when Senator Pratt's talking about fines, and correct me if I'm wrong, sir, that, if you owe somebody, let's just say $100 a day, you also owe a $100 fine on top of that if you didn't do that form. And there is no limit to the number of days. So if somebody holds on to that for a year, you might not only owe the wage money, but you will owe that fine for each of those days, theoretically, under the current language. So those two things, the flexibility in the form timeline and the cap on damages.
Yeah, so and those are really the two most controversial pieces of the bill we have, along with the status of temporary staffing agencies. But I'm hopeful that we're going to see some flexibility in the form. It seems to me that we should be able to come to an agreement to say that you can have that form filled out the same time you're doing your tax withholding forms and your and your benefits and everything else that comes at the beginning of employment. I'm getting a lot of pushback from the Department of Labor on that particular issue, and I'm getting a lot of pushback on the cap on fines. And so I would say, any advocacy to the Department of Labor to let them know how important these are to you. So again, the cap on the grace period on doing the form wrong. If you've got an HR manager that made a mistake and she made a mistake on 15 forms or maybe even 150 forms, and it's all the same mistake, we say that should count as one violation, and we should give you a grace period on that just for the form. That the Department of Labor shouldn't be able to come in and penalize you. The cap on fines is a little bit different in that if the Department of Labor finds that you have to give, they order you to pay back wages to somebody and you want to take it to court, as you said, Justin, if you owe that person $100 a day, after 10 days, you start accruing $100 additional a day in fines. And we think that there should be a cap on what those fines should be. Before we passed the wage theft law, it was 15 days. And it was a mistake and an inadvertent mistake to remove that cap. Now, whether that cap, we currently have it proposed at 20 days, should it be 30 days? I don't know. I've been trying to work and find that balance so that we level that playing field between employers and employees. But they're a little bit different, but very much the same. And school districts also struggle with the doing the form pre-employment. So we just think it should be part of that normal beginning of employment paperwork push.
Wonderful.
And we appreciate your partnership on that.
Absolutely. Another question was, is there any status on paid leave, any possibility that paid leave will be coming out of this session, or what do you see as the long-term future outlook for paid leave laws at the state level?
Yeah, so I've looked at the paid leave law for a number of times, and it's probably one of the worst insurance bills I've ever seen written. So the Senate actually has a market approach. What we found out in our research was that an insurance company couldn't come in and offer family and medical leave. We have disability, but the Department of Commerce would not allow anybody to come in and write those policies. So rather than have the state become the insurer, what we'd like to do is remove that barrier at the Department of Commerce, let insurers come in and craft policies to sell to employers without a mandate. Look, we know that you're all fighting for employees. The job market's tight, and this helps you compete on a level playing field with the larger employers that are self-employed or self-insured. So that's the tack that the Senate's taking. I'm not optimistic that we're going to come to an agreement on that, because the House and the governor are very much in the camp that they want to have paid leave managed and insured at the state level like we have unemployment insurance.
Okay, great. We have a question about any, well, is it fair to say then that bill as it stands is not coming through the Senate Jobs Committee? Is that a fair statement, Senator?
It'll probably be coming to the Jobs Conference Committee, but in the Senate, it's actually sitting in the Commerce Committee. So we'll have to see where we end up on that.
Fair enough. Follow-up question is on, there's been talk nationally within the HR community about different states that have passed things like mandated sexual harassment training, banning salary history questions. Is there any legislation that you're aware of that touches on those things in the state?
I don't recall seeing any bills come through my committee on those issues. And so I would say that's not a real, it hasn't been an issue that I've seen this session rise to the top. Fair
enough. And then one of my final questions, sir, is asking for your advice. One of the things that SHRM is focused on is helping our members have a say in crafting the legislation that we deal with, which of course is why I've been working with your office on some of these issues. You talked about advocacy to the Department of Labor. I'm
Yep.
sure as a senator, you have constituents come and speak to you about all kinds of issues. Can you give some tips to our members on speaking to their legislature and some tips on advocating for things that they believe in?
You know, this is a question I get a lot. And one of the great things about being a state legislator, say versus in Washington, D.C., is that, you know, we still live in the community. I see people at the hardware store. I see people at the grocery store or walking down the street. And your state legislator is very accessible. I think the thing to remember is that we're your neighbors and we work for you. We're here as public servants. So don't be afraid to reach out and talk to us. Don't be afraid. In fact, we want to hear from you. We want to hear that input because we're not experts in everything. And so it's amazing how I'll have a meeting with a constituent or with an organization like SHRM, and there'll be a story that sticks with me that'll come out at some point in time. And you really do have an important influence on what we do and how we view issues. Just remember that, you know, we're just like you. Don't be afraid to come to us. We want to be accessible and we want to be helpful to you. So take advantage of it. You know, it's start a relationship with your representative and your senator. Because when you have that relationship before there's a crisis, it makes that dealing with the crisis a whole lot easier.
Fair enough. Well, Senator Pratt, thank you so much for being here today. I know we interrupted some important time. And so thank you for your help on the wage theft and for your leadership in the Senate and for making yourself available today, and to your staff who assisted in the scheduling and the prep. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, and thank you for your partnership. You're an important partner to the work we do on the Jobs Committee, and I just appreciate working with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. We are going to turn it over to Jenny in just a minute. I just wanted to note for the record, we did invite Representative Rob Eklund, the chair of the House counterpart committee that specializes in labor and employment. He never, despite a few different attempts, he did not respond to our invitation. And we were able to reach out to Governor Walz's office to make sure that we had a balanced approach and folks from both parties available to speak about their initiatives. Somebody did ask about who you contact. So it's important to note that if you are looking to speak to your legislator, it's the legislator who covers the address you live at, not the one who represents the area you work at. And so be aware of that. I can send out a link. Your legislative affairs directors at your chapter can help you as well, where you can search your home address and find out who represents you. Doesn't mean you can't speak to other legislators, but the ones who represent you are going to be most interested in speaking with you, of course, because you're a voter. And that's a really important reminder. And I appreciate Susan from Twin Cities SHRM for helping to remind me to clarify that. At this point, I'm going to invite Jenny back to finish her recap. We had a little bit of a snafu with the PowerPoint, and so I appreciate you jumping in. I'm sorry to bifurcate your presentation a little bit, but I'm going to hand it over to you, and then we're going to hear from Jason Gabhart to round out our afternoon together. So Jenny, take it away.
Awesome, thank you. I'm sure everyone was just on the edge of their seats waiting for the rest of my presentation. So, and thank you for the few folks that asked questions. If you do have other questions for me, just drop them in the chat. Happy to answer those. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so just a few slides left. I know Justin mentioned that this program is pre-approved for 2.5 recertification credits towards SHRM certification. So for those of you that are already certified, great job. You are working toward your recertification, 60 credits every 3 years, way to go. For those of you that may not be certified yet, This slide just has a couple basics about certification. We have two different credentials, the SHRM Certified Professional, or SHRM CP, and the SHRM Senior Certified Professional, or SHRM SCP. And these are just really great ways to not only demonstrate that you are a well-rounded and competent HR professional, but I can tell you, when I first tested for my credential, it was earlier on in my career, and just the process of preparing for the test, I participated in a local chapter study group, but just that process exposed me to so many things that I didn't actually get the chance to work on in my day job. So it actually helped me become a more well-rounded HR professional, in addition to kind of earning that distinction. There's all kinds of great statistics about how SHRM certified professionals earn more and advance further in their careers. If you want any of those particulars, I know that there are some great statistics like that on our website. We also have some specialty credentials that you'll see listed on the screen. There's one for California, for talent, people analytics. There's even one for departments of one. I know I mentioned that earlier, just all the things that those folks need to handle. So if you have questions, you can scan the QR code and visit our website. I'm also happy to answer any if you've got any about certification. And then the other thing I would be remiss if I didn't mention, if we were in person, I would ask everyone by raise of hands who's a member of their local SHRM affiliated chapter. But since I am just talking to Zoom and I can't see where you're at, I'm just going to say that I hope that many of you are local chapter members already. And if you are not, I hope you look into it. There are, gosh, Justin would have to help me out with this, how many chapters there are in Minnesota. But there's quite a few and they're all spread around. So there's likely one in your area. Justin, do you have that number?
I believe we have 12. Christine
Wow.
would definitely be the person to answer, but if she wants to throw it in the chat, we either have 12 or 14. 12 is correct, I'm hearing from Donna, who helps with that part of the world. So thank you, Donna.
Awesome. Thank you for that fun fact. Kansas has 12 chapters as well. That's just a fun fact for you. So I feel like we've got a lot in common. But definitely think about joining your local chapter. It's a great way to meet other HR professionals. You can be a volunteer leader like Justin, which is just a great opportunity to learn and grow as a professional. And you can find what is your closest chapter by just visiting the website and using the chapter locator, as the screen says. And then finally, just a couple of different opportunities to stay connected with us on various different platforms. There's me, and then there's your designated member engagement associate. And that's all I've got, Justin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny, and welcome to this part of the world. We're looking forward to meeting you in person, of course, in October at our state conference, and probably a few other times along the way. Our final speaker, who's going to round us out, became a good friend of mine a few weeks ago. We were in Washington, D.C. and had a great opportunity to meet and spend some time together. Jason is a California native. He lives out in the Sacramento area, and he is I don't want to label you, but a professional lobbyist who helps us with state level issues. And he's become an important partner to MNSHRM as we look for opportunities to serve our members and their interests at legislative and policy issues. So thank you, Jason, for making the time to be here today and sharing your thoughts and expertise. And I'll hand it off to you.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, as Justin mentioned, I am Jason Gabhart. I have been with SHRM for about 8 years now. I was initially hired to be SHRM's lobbyist within California. I worked sometimes on other state issues, but it was mainly California. However, about a year ago, I was assigned to do all states. So that's where Justin was mentioning that I can help you guys. Whether there's a bill out there that you guys think that you need help on, if you wanted to advocate on, help with a position letter, or help with testimony, we're there to help you. But today I want to just go over how you can elevate your voice within Congress and at the state level. So let's see if we can get this to go. There we go. So first I'll go over the fly-in advocacies when people actually come into Washington and meet with their members of Congress. Then we'll learn about members of Congress and their staff, and we'll see how viable or how important staff is to the congressmen and the senators. Then a quick review of the legislative process, and then go over sort of the meetings, what to do before a meeting, during a meeting, and after a meeting on Capitol Hill, whether it's with the congressperson or the staff. And then finding your way around Capitol Hill if any of you guys get to come in and actually do that. So start, this might be a little high level, but this is what we put together about how does constituency advocacy in Washington work. Obviously, Congress and the White House, they create the laws and regulations to govern the citizens. And then there's also the constituent role, you guys. So the citizens influence governing behavior by participating in advocacy efforts. That can include showing support, whether that's a letter, calling, asking for a change to a law, telling individual stories about whether it's your personal life or your job, about why a law should be changed or why a new law should be enacted, sharing new ideas if you have an idea of how something could be changed for the better, and then providing information. That's the big thing, is they really, really rely on information. So I did mention before a fly-in. A fly-in is actually when you fly in. Organizations like SHRM will host constituents or members from all around the country, and then we'll take you up to Capitol Hill and you'll meet with your actual senator and Congress people actually at the Capitol. And as Justin just mentioned, he and I were back in DC. We had a few of our actual members got to go over to Capitol Hill and meet with their members. Not all of the offices are taking meetings still with COVID, but a few were able to do that. So as the senator was just saying, even though he's a state senator, it's all the same, whether it's on the federal level or at the state level. Members do want to hear from you. You're their constituent. They value staying in touch with you. They want to hear the stories. The conversations that you have with them guide the policy making, and re-elections hinge on their ability to serve their constituents. They are serving you. You're the one, like he said, he works for you guys. They do trust their staff to help them listen to constituents. Don't be ever surprised if you meet with a staff member instead of a lawmaker. As Justin said, we were back in DC for SHRM's WPC conference, and a former federal senator from Louisiana, Senator Bro, said that he really emphasized that meeting with staff is very, very important, because they have the say whether if you treat them well, they're going to go back to their boss and sort of advocate on your behalf. But if you don't do that and you act disappointed that you're meeting with them, they're not really going to really help you out. So really take the opportunity to meet with staff. Personalized message, individualized communications are highly persuasive. They want to hear specifically of what's going on in your life. Do personalized letters or emails. Focus on personal messages to capture your individual voice. You really don't want the canned phone call or email or letter. I know sometimes we do that from SHRM. We will put out an alert, please, contact your congressperson. There's going to be this bill coming up for vote. But we try not to have the letter just be the exact same for everybody. We give you an opportunity to personalize that. And so that's really a benefit, because a lot of times if they get a bunch of letters that say the exact same thing and it's just a person's name is different, it's really not going to have that big of an impact. And then the firsthand knowledge of policy impacts are most compelling. Like the senator just said, he's not an expert in everything. So hearing from you guys as the HR professionals, that really makes an impact when you're talking to either the staff or the members. So the home advantage in congressional decision-making. So the constituent views and personalized outreach are the most influential, as you'll see over there, with the highest of a lot of positive influence, over 50%, and some positive influence all the way up to 94%, is the in-person visits from constituents. They want to hear from the people that they work for. Next to that is basically contact from constituent reps. That's the lobbyists. But as you can see, a lot of positive influence sort of goes down a little on that. So in the end, it is hearing from you, the actual constituents, that really makes the most when you're meeting with them. Success in advocacy space can take time. Legislation does move slowly through Congress. I'm really focused more on California, and we have a 2-year session. So there's a lot of deadlines. So things move much more quickly than I'm used to in California. But with my colleagues on the federal level, I do realize that things do take a lot a lot of time when they're working on issues. So you can see here for the 115th Congress and the 116th Congress. So there were 400, so for the 115th Congress, I'll just use the example, there was 443 laws that were enacted, 758 passed resolutions, 867 bills got a vote. But other legislation, there was 11,474 that were introduced. So basically only 5 to 6% of bills make it to the House or the Senate floor. So there's a lot of issues, a lot of ideas that are presented, but not a lot of things make it. So you do have to be patient that one year you might go up to the Hill and talk about a certain issue, and next year you'll come back and you're going to talk about the same issue. It's because things take a long time, and every time a bill isn't going to pass in the same year necessarily. So learning about members of Congress and the staff, Hill staffers really outweigh the lawmakers, the number there on Capitol Hill. As you can see, for the House of Representatives, there's 435 members. There's 1,164 congressional committee staff that staff all the members within their committee assignments. However, there's 6,030 personal office staff for those 435 members. So you could just see that staff really outnumber the lawmakers. So hence, that's why chances are you're going to meet with the staff member, and that they really are an important member of the office, and because they have their boss's ear. As I said, expect to speak to Capitol Hill staff during the meetings. This is also on the state level, but not so much, because usually the states, that varies. The offices aren't as big at the state level. Even here in California, an average member might have probably like 5 staffers, whereas here, as you see on Capitol Hill, this is just typical. You'll have the member of Congress, you'll have the chief of staff, then there's the policy staff that has the ledge director, a ledge aide, a ledge assistant, and a legislative correspondent. Then they also have their own separate communication staff with a communications director, and then a press secretary or assistant. Then there's an office staff where there's the personal assistant / scheduler and a staff assistant. And then also they have a huge thing under their district staff, and probably a few district offices with a director, district caseworker, and probably a district scheduler and personal assistant there as well. So the main thing here is that staff really outweigh the members. So they have more time to meet with constituents. Usually you're going to meet, if you do meet with a staffer, they usually are hopefully going to schedule something with the staffer that actually works on that issue. So with the HR professionals, that they work on the labor. If you're going in there for healthcare, you don't want the person that works on healthcare. So here's just the sort of the members of Congress. You have the chief of staff. Sometimes you will meet with the chief of staff, but not often. Usually it's a legislative director. And like I said, they tend to be the specialists in the policies of the committees which the member is on, or they'll focus on the issue that you would want to speak to them. So now with COVID, sort of research has shown that FaceTime with an actual member of Congress became harder in the virtual atmosphere. You thought maybe there'd be more, since I think everybody in the working world, it seems like they're on more Zoom calls and seeing other people's faces than they would before. But there's actually challenges to members of Congress getting on virtual meetings. And here we have a few quotes. With Congress back in session, please be flexible and aware that the members running back and forth from votes. It takes a little longer to set everything up, but trust our office. We'll have them on the call and be good to go, though the building and the buffer time can help. The congressman has loved hopping onto meetings, has taken well to the technology, despite a few town halls with audio Wi-Fi connections. Still, it is tough to schedule meetings with her due to all the committee's assignments under her belt. Also over here, it's difficult to double book in an online environment. Here is a quote from a ledge assistant. It's been a lot more challenging for the congressman to join calls. Before, he could just pop around the office when multiple meetings were happening, but with everything scheduled online, that's harder for that person to do. So just keep in mind that, because I think at the beginning we all thought, oh, with this online going virtual, we're probably going to see the members more often, but that's necessarily not the case. Now I'll go over a quick review of the legislative process, and this is at the federal level, which is a little different at each state level. I know it's different than California, but this is just the high level of how a bill becomes a law at the federal level. It can either start at the House of Representatives or at the Senate. So a representative or a senator will introduce a bill by filing with the House or Senate clerk. And usually they'll either introduce that because of something they've seen and they have a passion about, or hearing from one of their constituents or an advocacy group convincing them that something needs to be done. So either way, they will introduce it with the clerk. Then it's committee consideration. The bills will be referred to committee for debate, analysis, and any amendments. Only simple majority are needed to pass committees in both the House and the Senate. And then they're often sent to subcommittees for extra analysis, especially on niche issues that are very specific. Then it'll move on for floor debate. In the House, it's debated and amended. Simple majority needed to pass. If it's over in the Senate, it's debated and amended. However, 3/5 majority needed to end a debate, and then a simple majority is needed to pass. So if it passes the House floor or passes the Senate floor, if both chambers pass an identical bill, it's sent directly to the president, but that's usually not the case. If they pass different bills, they have to have a conference committee is formed of representatives and senators who try and then find a compromise on the bill to compromise what the Senate came up and what the House came up. And that bills that pass the conference committee then must pass both the House and the Senate again. It has to go back to those. So it'll go to the president. It will become a law after the president signs it, or after 10 days if they take no action. That's similar here in California. I think it's 15, I think. So it doesn't necessarily have to take positive action to actually sign it to go into law. That's one way. But if the president doesn't take any action after 10 days, it'll become law. He can reject the bill with a veto, and then Congress can override the veto with a two-thirds majority vote in each of the chambers. So as I said previously, that a lot of bills, there's a lot of ideas that are introduced, but it takes a long time. It takes a lot of action to actually pass. So it faces numerous obstacles to passage. As you can see here, it's introduced in the House or Senate and sent to committee. It can be ignored by the full committee, not set for a hearing. That happens here in California. Some of the bills that we are supporting, because there's a majority Democrat party here, and a lot of Republican bills don't even get heard. So the committee won't even hear a bill sometimes. So even if it is heard, it could fail passage in that committee or fail passage in the subcommittee. It could fail passage in the committee votes. Then it placed on legislative calendar. The Senate Majority Leader, the House Speaker, can decline to put the bill on the calendar. So that's where a lot of the influence, a lot of the power gets from the leaders. Hence why parties want to be in control. It goes to the floor debate. It could be filibustered during debate in the Senate. And then there could also be something called a poison pill, where amendments can be sabotaged in the final passage. And basically you're lobbying to your own bill to kill your own bill, which happens sometimes. And then bill will fail a final vote in the full chamber. And then the process, all these obstacles that you have to go over in the same chamber. So that's why it's tough to pass a bill in Congress. Even if it does pass, it still faces hurdles. It can be enacted, signed by the president, passed by Congress, but the president can veto a bill. Congress can override that with a 2/3 vote by each chamber. But then also after all that, the federal judge can prevent the enforcement of the law, issuing an injunction. It can also strike it as unconstitutional or parts of it unconstitutional. And then executive interpretation. The president can write an executive order or signing statements that prevent a law from being enforced as originally intended. So there's a lot of hurdles that you have to come over in order to get a bill passed through Congress. Also, you can overturn it by federal regulations via the Congressional Review Act. So basically an agency publishes a rule, and then their 60-day consideration period opens on that. A joint resolution drafted in Congress, then there's a full vote in the House and Senate. It can be blocked, or the president could sign it, president can veto it, or if the president vetoes, they can do an override, and then the regulation can be upheld. So that's another way that something can be stopped. So going back to your meetings, if you ever get the chance of coming back to Capitol Hill, or like I said, this is also for if you want to do it in the state capitol in Minnesota, to take these tips. Before, help offices by taking out the guesswork. Basically, we got a lot of these quotes from schedulers from people in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, is that they would rather have more information than go back and forth. Give them attendee list, give them the names, the people where people work, their hometown, because just like Justin was saying, they want to make sure that you actually live in their district, not just you work. I mean, it's great if you do both, but they want to make sure that you actually live in that district. So know the ties to the district. Even if it is you do work in it, that's not a deal killer. You probably still meet with them because it's nice to know that you work in their district, and especially if it's a huge company that they know about it. If you are going to invite them and try to set up a meeting, make sure it's clear, the date, the time, what you want to be talking about, like what's on the agenda. They don't want to have to just assume, okay, it looks like an HR group, they're probably going to want to talk about workplace issues. It's just better if you say, we want to talk about these specific bills. I know for me, for California, I set up the meetings for the legislative day here in California, and I say our members want to speak on these two bills. We support both. Here are the bills, here are the authors, and here are the summary of the bills, and we support both. It just helps them for that, and it makes the meeting go better. Ease into the adoption of unfamiliar meeting platforms. Virtual meetings, I know it's been 2 years, so maybe people are getting the hang of it, but there's still those issues. Just make sure you know how to learn the technology. I'm still, as I said, setting up meetings for the SHRM people. I think I'm doing 47 meetings, and about 7 of them are still via Zoom. And so I have to make sure that our constituents that are going to do that, that they are familiar with that and they know how to do that. So just make sure that everyone knows it's on the right platform, that you don't think it's Google Meet and it's Zoom. Just make sure that everyone has the right links, everyone has the same link. And then there might, like I said, it might require more upfront planning. Consider how you interact online and adapt to the moment. It's not in person, but we still call it face-to-face. I mean, you're still getting to see them. Here's a legislator that said, I prefer Zoom or other calls over phone calls, since you know who is talking and you're less likely to have people cutting each other off. Because I know I've had some people off at the beginning say, well, can't we just call? And we try to recommend for our members, no, still do a Zoom, because they still see it as face-to-face and they get to recognize you. So it's better moving forward to establish that relationship. Make an extra effort to engage online. Here's a scheduler from the House said the big difference for virtual meeting versus in person is there's a lot of anxiety on both sides. Plus there's the logistics of trying to do more to engage individuals when they're not in person. And then offer scheduling flexibility. One scheduler said it's tough when advocacy groups only give 1 day as an option to meet with the office. If we're virtual, it seems like there should be flexibility to meet with a member on another day a week. And that came up with SHRM's WPC this couple weeks ago in DC. Most of our members went either over to the Capitol or met with their members virtually on one specific day. However, we did have a few of our members meet a few days before and a few days after because of that reason. If it's going to be virtual, be flexible. We'll meet with them a few days after or a few days before. So don't go back and say, no, this is the only day we can do it. Try to be flexible when you're scheduling this. So the heart of any good policy story is an individual, but too many organizations prioritize the issues or themselves. So what they're saying here is that they want to hear from you as the HR professional, how a bill affects you or how it's going to affect you, not necessarily this is how it's going to affect my business. They want to see this distinction between corporations and people. Here's the federal executive from Department of Labor. It says most people in government see corporations as not being people. I think the best way to get to that is tell a good story with real information, real facts. Otherwise, there's a lot of people in government who don't ever get past the corporate angle. This isn't going to hurt that person at all. It's just going to be the company. So start off by saying how it's going to affect you personally and you in your job every day to day, your actions as that, not saying this is how it's going to affect my company. So it's better just to talk about how it affects you. Prepare to go beyond talking points and anecdotes. I know that a lot of times, like here in California and at SHRM at the national level, we'll give our members fact sheets or cheat sheets to sort of have talking points. Don't just stay on those. If you have something else that you want to add that's going to add to the story, feel free to do that. It doesn't have to be rigid and only stay to that. Just make sure that it stays on point, and make sure that the anecdotes are helpful and that they illustrate an issue. Be specific, balanced, and mindful. Make sure that you give them data that they want. And here's some prepping for dialogue with an actual member of Congress. So here we have geographic connection. Introduce your geographic connection and convey appreciation for their work. They like to know that you're a constituent, or at least work in their district. Summarize the member's connection to the issue in one sentence. It could be because they're actually a committee member on the committee that's going to hear this bill. It could be because they've introduced bills that on this issue before, but try to have some sort of connection there. Urgency, provide a one-sentence overview of why the story is important, that it's like upcoming. A lot of times we do this because things are coming up, saying it's going to be up for a vote in 2 weeks in your committee, or it's going to be on the floor in a few weeks and you're going to have an opportunity to vote for this. So do a sense of urgency. A lot of times, not that they won't listen, but if you go in saying, oh, this was a bill that didn't pass, but they're probably going to introduce it next year, we'd still like to talk about it. They'll listen, but that doesn't create a sense of urgency. Additional details, share your story and call to action, offering access to more information as appropriate. And then future contact, reference any upcoming outreach that you'll be taking place between your counterparts. If there's going to be a town hall, or if your specific chapter is going to be hosting something, invite them to those things. Planning your face-to-face meeting with an actual member of Congress. Be on time. I mean, that's an obvious given. They might not be on time, but obviously we know that they're busy being pulled a lot of different directions, but be on time. Be flexible. We've seen it last minute. Hey, can you meet in 30 minutes? Can you meet in the cafeteria instead of the office? Just be flexible that they might move things around as even that day. Stay on topic, as I mentioned before. Don't go off on things that they don't have any control over. So nothing that they're not going to be voting on coming up. Keep politics out of it. Don't discuss elections or campaign support in your meeting. It intimates that the member is for sale. You don't want to say, well, I know you're coming up for election. It'd probably be best if you voted for this. Respect their political views, even if it's different than yours. You don't want to go in there because that's probably the quickest way that you're going to that you're not going to get that respect is by doing that. And then leave brief materials behind. We try to do a 1-2 page max of the issue, what our position is, and some few talking points, so they'll have that. And then what content is most helpful to Capitol offices? Like I said, a 1-pager, that's favorite of some of the schedulers or some of the staff. A lot of people like to have something prior. So if you are going to meet, sometimes if you have the 1-pager or you have your talking points that you can share prior to that, that helps out a lot. Just the facts. Don't spend so much time trying to go over something in the wording of it in a big summary and a big thesis. They just want to know the facts. So it's okay if you just give them a fact sheet. Don't think that they're going to think, okay, they didn't write something out. Some people like paper, some people like digitally. They like it just in their inbox so they can just look at it online, condensed. And so make sure that it's to the point. Additional tips for the virtual Hill meetings. Have when scheduling, opt for technology where participants are visible, unless the offices know what virtual platform you'll use. So try to get one like Zoom or Google Meet where you know people are going to be able to be seen. Be flexible, like I said, especially when it's virtual. Supply the offices with an agenda and the participant list and pre-reading materials. Prep the advocates for discussion with offices with background information. Sometimes that's not available. For California, we have what's called an advocacy boot camp. We talk to them an hour prior before them going over to the Capitol here in Sacramento. We give them sort of what you should do, what you shouldn't do in the meetings, and here's the materials. So sometimes that's not an option because we get calls from some of our members saying, hey, I'm meeting with Congress member so-and-so. Do you have anything for us? And sometimes we do last minute, sometimes we don't. So if you do have that stuff, please send it beforehand. Also, if you guys are in a group and you can do this beforehand, discuss potential roles, someone to introduce everybody, someone to take notes. If someone has a specific story they can tell about their company, then let that person lead. And then also pick somebody to follow up, get all the business cards or have someone follow up, send everybody send the office all of the email addresses and the names of everyone that was in the actual meeting. And then here's managing in the dialogue, follow the agenda, introduce participants, obviously mute yourselves, listen actively, make the specific ask, always end with, so we'd love support of this, or we'd love the senator's opposition if this bill does come up in this committee, and then provide the digital handouts. Maintaining momentum after the meeting. This is what research has shown, that at the start of an advocacy campaign, momentum typically increases steadily. So everyone's, we've got this bill that we want passed, a paid sick leave, if national one, and everyone's for it. But then many campaigns lose momentum and drop previous engagement levels after the campaign ends. So ideally, an organization will ensure continuous engagement with advocacy efforts. We don't want it just to stop after we have those Hill days. We want you to go back to your district, maintain a relationship with those members of Congress or their senators, and keep the activity level at a high level. So after meeting with your member of Congress, serve as a trusted resource for the lawmakers or their staff. So here's some steps. Always send a thank you email, thank them for their time. Attend events in the district. I know I get a lot of phone calls from my specific member of Congress, whether it's a virtual one, town hall, or one in person. So if you have met with that member of Congress and you get invited to one, or you see that one is being advertised, we recommend that you go there, keep meeting them, get more FaceTime with them, and then stay in touch, whether that's just calling to see if they, even for their office, if you can be a resource, if any HR or workplace issues are coming up and they have questions. Or like I said, if Minnesota SHRM is having something, or your specific local chapter is having an event, whether it's virtual or in person, invite that member of Congress to speak. I think that's one area where the virtual platform has increased participation from the actual members of Congress. Is I've seen a lot of chapters throughout the country, SHRM chapters, were able to invite their members of Congress to participate on whether they call them virtual coffee hours or just virtual town halls, and they were able to participate in those. If you give them enough time, a lot of times they will participate on that. And last, here's a pitch to join SHRM's advocacy team. You can text A-Team to 52886. Some of you may be aware of the A-Team, some of you may be on the A-Team. This is just, I'd say 10 years ago now, we sort of asked our members, how can we get our members to really help their relationships with the members of Congress? And so what we did is we went out and said, if you have a relationship with your member of Congress, if you go to the same church, you're in the same Rotary Club, your kids go to the same school, you should be part of this A-Team. And then we rely on you to sort of, when we need action, you go out and talk to that specific member of Congress. And so now it's, even if you don't have that relationship and you still want to be part of it and you want to start that relationship, we just recommend you become part of SHRM's advocacy team. This is the advocacy team. If we have something that's on the floor or something's going to be up for a vote, we send something out to all these A-Team members. I think we're up to like 17,000 members in SHRM. Send something out to them saying, okay, go reach your member of Congress because this big issue for SHRM is coming up. So if you want to join, you can contact me, or you can just text A-Team to 52886. And the very last thing is, if you want to stay connected, you can subscribe to our HR policy briefing. It's our newsletter that I believe goes out bi-weekly on Tuesday afternoons. So you can visit that website there if you would like to sign up for that, or you can contact me and I can make sure you do that. And Justin, I believe that's it for the presentation. I'll stop.
All right, great. Well, we have one question here, and that's about whether what your thought is about building relationships with incoming members of the legislature versus simply the ones that are currently there, maybe lame ducks. What do you think about starting, I guess soon after Election Day?
No, that's a huge thing. The earlier you can do, even I've seen here in California is, a lot of the races aren't that tight, so who's probably going to win, when there's an open seat. And so it's your advantage to, whether it's in a Democratic controlled seat or Republican, to start that relationship even during the campaign because you have a sense of they're probably going to win and they're going to be here, and getting to know them prior. And like you said, right when they're elected, they don't, they're looking to a lot of people really because they're not, they don't know all the issues. And so if you went to that person and said, I'm an HR professional, there's a lot of workplace issues, and really the HR perspective is unique, and I want to help you understand that, they're really going to appreciate that. So yes, definitely, right when they're elected, take advantage of that.
Great. Well, Jason, the only other question I have for you is you've spent a couple hours with us today and heard some of the topics that came up with both Commissioner Showalter and Senator Pratt. How are you seeing some of these same discussions happen in other states, like paid family leave, wage theft issues, unemployment trust funds after the pit, things like
Right.
that? Is this a run of the mill for?
It
compared
is.
to other
It is.
states?
I know. Yeah, like the paid family leave. I know that we had a conversation with the ledge directors from Delaware. They have one that's going through, but it's not going to be till 2026. And I know the chamber's opposed, but there's been a lot of amendments. But paid family leave has been a big one.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for being here today and
Of
sharing
course.
your thoughts. And
Yeah.
we'll continue to work together and hopefully have a strong voice in St. Paul for our members. So, well,
Definitely.
folks, I want to thank once again Carrie Patton and Jay Kruger, our state director and director-elect, Christine Strock, who helps coordinate all this, who works with our state board, and of course, all the other volunteers on the board and in the chapters. Tracy, who's helping with our certification for this event. Again, you'll get the information you need in order to get credits applied for your certification. Next year, of course, we're hoping to do in person at the Capitol. And so you're going to be getting a survey within the next week or so. And one of the key things we want to know is whether you would look forward to that event and attend that event, as well as, of course, your opinions and thoughts on today. So with that, we appreciate your volunteerism and your interest in your profession. And once again, thank you for attending today, and best of luck going forward with the rest of the year. We'll see you all in October.